So you want me to tell you the story of my life?
Like I said, that's what I do. I interview people. I'm a collector of lives.
Welcome to Table Talk. I'm Heath, and I'll be your host. This is the show where I go one-on-one with a creator, author, illustrator, publisher, or other mover and shaker in the world of tabletop games, video games, TV, movies, or any other area of the Geekverse.
You followed me here, didn't you?
Yeah, I suppose I did. You seem very interesting. This is where you live?
Yes, this is my home. Welcome.
So, what do you do?
I'm a vampire.
That's something I haven't heard before.
Guests have included individuals such as Lou Anders, the author of the Thrones and Bones fantasy novels, creator and publisher of the Norengard RPG, and even the author of Star Wars, A Pirate's Price.
Bond. James Bond.
Well, not James Bond. I haven't gotten to talk to him yet, but maybe sometime in the future. But how about Brian Cullen, the creator of the vast, grim, dark horror RPG and sculptor of the World of Revelo monster busts? Marc Tassin, the creator of the World of Aetaltis, head of Mechanical Muse, and the head developer of the new Cool Name RPG. I've spoken with Jeff Engelstein, game designer and former commentator on the Dice Tower. He and I got deep into the statistics, probability, and psychological function of dice in tabletop games. Jamie Stegmaier, the founder of Stonemaier Games and crowdfunder extraordinaire. He's published many hit board games like Scythe and Wingspan. I've spoken with Sydney Engelstein from Indie Boards and Cards to talk about what it really takes to publish a board game in today's environment and what it would take for you to get published if you were trying to get a publisher for your board game. I've spoken with Ajit George about game writing, education, and his contribution to Van Richter's Guide to Ravenloft and his development of the Journey Through the Radiant Citadel Dungeons & Dragons book. Let's see, who else have I spoken to?
I am Hela, Odin's firstborn, commander of the legions of Asgard, the rightful heir to the throne, and the goddess of death.
Yes, I really appreciate her taking the time to speak with me. That was a great interview. I've also spoken with Cameron Pasha, a writer and novelist who's been working in Hollywood for over 20 years. His projects have included Emmy and Golden Globe nominated Sleeper Cell, Kings, Nikita, and Roswell, New Mexico. His analysis and commentary have been very popular on YouTube. I've gotten to speak with Paul Shadow, the former network executive, who has made quite a splash here on YouTube with his reaction videos to current movies and films. He and I discussed the status of independent film and web productions online today. Brianna De Silva is a reoccurring guest on the show, and a very popular one at that. She's an author and director, and she was also the co-writer of the Cultist comedy web show that's here on the channel. She and I regularly meet to study and analyze stories. I've also gotten to speak with of the Positive Fandom channel. She's an ally in our effort to be a positive and constructive force in the Geekverse. Are you ready? Have you got your drink? Are you all settled in? You might want to buckle up because it could be a wild ride. We're about to explore the worlds of tabletop gaming, sci-fi, fantasy, and the Geekverse through the eyes of those who are making things happen.
Atomic batteries to power. Turbines to speed.
Roger. Ready to move out.
It's time for Table Talk. Good evening, everyone. Welcome here to the office and welcome to Table Talk. It is so good to have everyone here. We have a guest favorite on the channel tonight who has been way too long since he has been here. We have got Marc Tassin, the creator of the Cool Name RPG and the founder of the Mechanical Muse. Welcome, Marc.
Hey, how's it going, Heath? Great to be here.
It is good. It has been too long since you have been on the channel.
Yeah, it has. It's been a while. It's been a bit.
If you are interested and you look up like Marc on this channel, Marc and I talked quite a bit during the OGL debacle. So really it's been since like January since he's been on here. But if you look up him on the channel, he has been here and we've talked a lot about the OGL situation, which is what brought him to his current project.
Yeah, that's right. The Cool Name RPG. It was born out of the whole OGL business that went down.
Okay. So this morning we took a deep dive into the Cool Name RPG playtest 1 release. And we went through it. So if anybody is looking to go through the rules in detail and what was released, you can do that by looking at what we looked at or this morning's show. But we're going to be talking about the design philosophy and what was going on behind all of that here. But first of all, Marc, do you want to tell everybody who you are and what this project is?
Yeah, sure. So Marc Tassin, and I am the founder of a company called Mechanical Muse. I have been working in writing in the game industry for years now. I've done work for Dragon Magazine and Shadowrun and a few other things over the years, a video game that sadly never saw the light of day. Published some short fiction and things, but my big project, well, I should also mention the Gen Con Writers Symposium, which
is actually how I first connected with you.
Yeah, that's right. And so I started out by running the Writers Symposium at Gen Con for about, I think it was 7 or 8 years. But yeah, the thing that I've been doing lately, though, is I started my own game publishing company called Mechanical Muse. We put out a bunch of books for a 5th edition compatible setting called the World of Aetaltis. Oh, there it is. Yeah, which I'm super proud of.
Right.
They've turned out great, and we're working on new stuff already. But when all of the concerns about what was going to happen with 5th edition came up, I thought, well, this is the perfect time to do a new system and just create a system and give it away to everybody. And so that's what Cool Name RPG is, right? It's a game system that we started building from literally nothing, and we're building it up with the help of some amazing consulting designers, and we're taking everybody along for the ride with us. So yeah, we did a Kickstarter, it funded, and it's coming along. It's pretty cool.
So you basically started with a development Kickstarter and got a lot of support for it.
Yeah, we did. We had a really good support. We had over 500 backers. I think we raised just over $30,000. And what we've got is that money is going to pay a dozen consulting designers, folks like Robin Laws, Matt Forbeck, Crystal Mazur, Eloy Lasanta, DBJ, who's often a viewer of your show. Right?
I know. We saw DBJ in the comments this morning. Maybe he'll show up here.
Steve Long. I mean, an amazing group of people. And they're all helping to advise us as we build this game from the ground up. So, yeah, it's been a fun and enlightening experience. I've learned so much already. It's been fantastic.
So, but then there will be another Kickstarter once development is done to actually get.
Well, actually, what will happen is, so this book's going to go out and we're going to create the book. The PDF is going to be free to the world and it's going to have all the rules in it. Anyone can do anything they want with the rules. You can copy them. You can copy them word for word. We don't care. Russell Marks is actually doing art for it. He's the guy who does all the Aetaltis art, and that art's going to be free to use as well. So anyone who wants to build anything with Cool Name can do it.
So you are going to have the free art.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I talked about that this morning.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, that's something new that we weren't doing originally, but thanks to late pledging, we started to generate additional funds, and all those funds go straight back into the project. And in this case, we're adding art to it as well, which will be really cool. And so, yeah, then that's going to all come out by Gen Con of next year is our goal. And so that'll all be done. Mechanical Muse is doing sort of a deluxe version of the book that we're putting out, and that'll be available for sale. But our next Kickstarter will probably be something related to Aetaltis, and maybe it'll be the Cool Name RPG conversion. Maybe it'll be something new. We haven't quite decided yet. We just want to get through Cool Name first.
Oh, so that's it. So so you can late pledge for it. I've got this scrolling across the bottom. So if you got a Cool Name RPG, you can late pledge if you were not in on the Kickstarter, and that will get you the PDF. Well, you said you can put the PDF out for free anyway.
The PDF's going to be totally free. We're going to put it on Drive-Thru-RPG. Anyone can download it. Anyone can use it. We'll have both what we call the core rules, and then we're going to have a secondary set of rules modules, because the whole game is built so you can like plug in things. You can mod it basically to make it the game you want it to be. And that's all going to be free. Now, we'll also sell a hardcover book with full color and all sorts of things through Mechanical Muse. But anyone else could do the same if they wanted to as well. But yeah, that's it. It's going to go out there into the world and be ready to go. We even have some designers who backed the project because we have designer levels and publisher levels. And I'm excited to see what people start building.
James says that's incredibly generous.
Oh, well, thanks, James. I mean, that was one of the things we wanted to do was capture, like this was our inspiration. We wanted to capture the essence of what gaming is all about, which is a bunch of generous people coming together to build something cool together without really asking much back. And so that's what we want to do with this whole project. So,
all right. Well, do you want to talk about the design process? Where do you want to start with that?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit about it. I mean, what we started with is, you know, my day job is software. And I know that you don't start developing anything without having a really good plan in place, right? You need to know what you're doing and why you're doing it. And so one of the first things we wrote was a document called the Tome of Requirements. And I think it was something like 15 pages. It was an enormous, that's why we called it a tome. But it went through and described all the things that we wanted to accomplish with this project and the things that are important to us to accomplish. And it helped to sort of guide us as a roadmap. Now, we've written a much shorter document, which is sort of just our goals and efforts, which is where we describe what sort of game we're building and what's the style of play is going to be. But we started with those documents because we wanted that to be the foundation for all our work. So before we even started talking mechanics or anything, we started with that.
Okay, so I was just checking. So Stray posted the YouTube channel. So I was just checking to make sure that was the link. It's the link I posted here. So that's the Mechanical Muse YouTube channel.
Oh, yeah,
so
thanks.
I'll post that here. So I had been, Mark had been posting like a design journal, a vlog, video design journal, either every Thursday night or every other Thursday night or something like this.
Every Thursday with a couple of breaks for vacation, but every Thursday I go on and sort of tell folks where we're at and what we've done and what we learned.
So if you're interested in the RPG design, which we also talk about on this channel, I've been working on scripts. I haven't worked on my RPG, but we talk about the RPG design on this channel, and some of those are the most popular videos. And so if you're interested in RPG design philosophy of this whole thing that's been going on with Cool Name, that is the place to go. And you can catch up on all the design blogs because I thought they've been fantastic.
Yeah, and we bring in all the feedback that we get from our consulting designers. We're going to be getting more and more of that as we go along. And we're doing our best to share that with folks to sort of say, here's what they're telling us. Here's what they're suggesting, the things they're warning us about, etc. Okay.
Well, let's go topic by topic then. I mean,
yeah, sure.
While we have time or whatever. Let's go. Okay, let's talk about what your design philosophy between, you said, your basic and your advanced rules, and what the actual new approach to that is.
Yeah, so we started out with this idea of basic and advanced. I mean, that's kind of the first thing everyone thinks of with gaming, right? I mean, that's sort of the approach that's been taken since the beginning. But what we realized is that when people heard the words basic and advanced, what they heard was, well, I start out with basic and then I abandon it and then I move on to the advanced. And if you're using advanced, you're somehow better than basic, right? And that's not at all what we wanted. And it's in our early surveys, we found that's not at all what our backers wanted. What we really wanted to have was the idea where you could have a simple playable game, a game you can get into, you can play, you can get rolling with it and have a ton of fun with it without a lot of effort, without a lot of investment of time to get playing. And then options for customizing that game to make it something even better for you and your group. And so that's where we came up with this idea of having a core rules instead of a basic rules, which is a standalone game, works great. And then having a set of advanced or not advanced, a set of modules that you can plug into the game. And in some cases, it might make the game more complex. Like you might say, hey, I want to use the wound module so we can have wounding system because I think that's really cool and it's the sort of game I want to play. But you might also say, look, I want the system that's just going to simplify the game a bit. It breaks down the attributes into 4 basic attributes. It's not as complex and it lets my group tell the sort of storytelling adventure we want to tell without a lot of that extra stuff. So that's what the modules are all about now. And that's the new approach that we're taking.
I think that works very well because I was saying this morning, it seems like GURPS in that regard, because you've got GURPS, that's the basic rules. And sometimes you buy another GURPS book that can make some element of GURPS much more complicated if you want a lot more detail. But sometimes you buy a GURPS book and it says, this is how you simplify some element of the game.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that, it is a lot like that in that respect, although we're trying to embrace the whole modular concept even more so. And it's a challenge. It's something that's going to be a lot of work for us. But it's just this idea that you can plug and play and just really adapt the game the same way you make your character, right? When you make a character in a role-playing game, you want to have enough options that you can make them your own, right? That's what we're trying to do, is just make the whole game that way, that you can build a game that for you and your friends is a game that is truly who you are and the way you like to play, and yet not alien to other people. And also one where if someone puts out a book, you can bring it easily into your game, even if you're doing something a little bit different.
Dungeon Master says it's so cool to see all this creativity coming out from the OGL Bowl.
Yeah. We had always wanted to do this, and it inspired us to just get off our butts and do it. In a lot of ways, it was a good reminder that we can do this stuff. We just need to jump up and put in the work.
Okay, so then we've got the core resolution mechanic, your core gameplay mechanic, which is really what you're centered around playtesting.
Yeah, that's
so
what
do you want to explain what the core mechanic is and
Yeah,
how,
and-
and then how you came to it.
Okay, yeah,
That's two
I'll do
different
that.
things.
So
Yeah, okay.
the core mechanic is a system where the first thing you do is the GM adds up anything that's going against the player. If it's making it harder for the character to accomplish their task, it all goes on this side. The GM just adds this up, and that's your difficulty score. The player, meanwhile, adds up everything that's working in their favor and then looks on a list, and it shows them what dice to roll based on that number. And that's the whole system, start to finish. You could even leave out the rolling part if someone just wanted something where you just compare. But yeah, there you go.
We'll talk about that in a moment. But here is your core mechanic, right?
Yeah. So you add up everything on one side. That's all the bad stuff from the character's point of view. That's the difficulty score. You add up all the good stuff on the other side. That's your action score, and you're good to go. And that's the mechanic in a nutshell. And this first play test is all about seeing how well that works, how easy it is to grab the dice, how hard or easy it is to come up with the difficulty score or the action score, and just get people's feedback on that. And so far, it's been pretty awesome, actually. We've been really happy.
So you're going to have a set difficulty, and I thought it was interesting as we go down the difficulty. Your set difficulty from the game master side for this task is based on the skill needed to potentially do that thing.
Yeah.
Is it unskilled, novice, skilled, expert, master, legendary?
Yeah. So like
skilled is 6, so probably 6 can be used a lot.
Yeah,
that could be like your target number.
Yeah, that's sort of your general center area where like a character might be doing things. Your general PC is going to be doing things at about that level most of the time.
Okay. And so, and then, but you can, if it's, so that's supposed to be something that's inherent about the object out there in the world, or the obstacle out there in the world. It can get harder than that if it is also dark and raining.
Exactly. And for each one of those, you just add 1 to the difficulty score is the idea.
1 to the difficulty.
Yeah.
Okay. And then you add up everything that's working on your favor, which is generally an attribute and possibly a skill.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, I've got the fantastic sword of
Right. You've got the sort of and the high ground, right?
Yeah, and the high ground.
Add 1 for each one of those as well.
And so you find out that is your AS, your action score. And if you find out that it's an 8, then you're going to be rolling D6 plus 10.
Yep.
And you're rolling D6 plus 10 to try to exceed the difficulty score.
Yep. That's it.
That's what we're doing.
And then it's open-ended. So if you roll the highest,
and it's open-ended.
Floating is another way people say it. You roll the highest number on the die, you get to re-roll it. And yeah, that's the system in a nutshell. It's that simple.
Well, it was brought up that exploding, but so when I think of open-ended, I was open-ended high and open-ended low. So if you're just open-ended high,
yes,
so
just
that's
open-ended
just
high.
exploding. It's just open-ended high, which has consequences that I want to talk about. That's really interesting. Okay, so how did you develop and decide on this mechanic of all the possible things that are out there?
So I started by going to my library. The stack of books is gone. I put it away because I got in trouble for leaving it out for too long. But I went through roughly 50 different game systems and analyzed how every single one of those systems worked. And I've played most of them, not all of them. And I started to figure out what other people were doing in general and really understanding the lay of the land, what we as a hobby have come up with in terms of systems. Then we started to look at those systems and say, what are the ones that are fast, that are easy to play, that you can build off of most easily? And as we started going through it, we realized that, you know, the D20, the classic D20 was certainly an option, but we didn't feel like it quite got us where we wanted to be. We also did a survey with our backers and asked a lot of questions about dice mechanics. What is fun for you? What stuff have you had your best games with? What are the things that slow your game down? And we took all of those elements and started taking a look at our options. And in the end, it really just came down to looking at all of these different elements, deciding how easy it was to build on them, and then settling on one of them as a direction to go based on what our requirements were. So requirements like people wanted a system that would allow you to have degrees of success and degrees of failure, the yes and yes but rule. So we needed a system that had that room to add that in. We needed a system that allowed people to have exploding dice because people love it. They just love it. It's so fun when you roll and you get the highest, right? And in the end, we looked through all those and we came up with this added up mechanic where you just add things up on both sides and it makes it very simple. And we went, well, let's see how it works. We showed it to folks. Folks liked the looks of it. And so we're like, well, then let's see how it works. And here we are today now, trying it out.
Okay. Let's see.
I want to say one thing that we did also send it to our consulting designers, and they gave us amazing feedback on it as well. And so to say that we just did it ourselves, it's us, it's the backers, it's the consulting designers, the Discord group, all of the above. It was great.
Okay, you mentioned when you're talking about, because I also, one of the reasons that I really like watching your design journals is because I was working on the Faded Edge system, which we're going to get back to on this channel. I just have been working on other things, but this idea, Sable Phoenix says, it sounds like you're trying to make something that really hasn't been done before, or trying to do something that hasn't been done before.
Yeah, I mean, that isn't necessarily our goal. Our goal is to have something that is intuitive and fun to play, right? I mean, at the end of the day, that's what it's all about. We also had, we can talk about this after, but we had sort of an underlying definition of what the gameplay should be like. And, there have been games that have done things like this. Earth Dawn, for example, is very similar to this. Its game mechanics are first edition Earth Dawn. It went through and had a table very similar, but they had slightly different ways of doing the mechanics of the math behind it. Slightly different way of figuring out where you're rolling. So nothing is really new in the game industry. There's everything's been tried by someone someplace.
So, okay, you do say that one thing you're still trying to figure out is that you're saying that everything that could potentially work against the player is added to its the difficulty. It's difficulty. What's the name of it? I'm sorry.
Difficulty score.
Difficulty score. Not difficulty class. Difficulty score. It gets added to that, and everything is +1. But that potentially has an issue with how do you say, well, how do you differentiate between dim light and darkness, or light cold and frigid cold? Yep.
And to be honest, I don't know the answer to that yet. That's like we've told people from the start. This is a journey we're all on to try to figure this out from scratch. And, I'll be interested to see how people solve these problems in their own games. But yeah, we'd like to keep it that simple, though, because one of the things I want to avoid, and this came up, is things that slow down people's game, which is when they stop and try to figure out how much of a modifier something should give. And this came up in our surveys where everyone stops while the GM tries to work it out. What I want is something where the GM goes, it's a 6 because you got to be skilled. It's dark, rainy, and cold. That's +3, 9. There you go. Good. Let's move on. Right. And that's really the goal. And so I don't quite know how we're going to solve that problem yet, though, of the sort of gradients, or if maybe we need to. I don't know.
Well, like Sable says, okay, frigid and cold could be separate conditions. That's -2. And by the way, hey, PH, good to see you. But, when I was working on something, I was trying to prevent that too, that, okay, how long can we go trying to define a modifier?
Yeah.
And it seems like, I guess there are actually two ways that you could go. You could say that your maximum modifier either way might be +3 or -3.
Yeah.
Or you could say that your maximum number of conditions that apply is 3 either way. That way, like, you could have complete darkness and that's a -3 or whatever. Okay, but that's 1, and then there are 2 others. So it seems like there could... my solution when I was working on something was just to say that there's a cap on the number of modifiers you can have, so that if you are trying to find all of yours, well, once you've found 3, you're done.
So that's really interesting because we explored that, and there's a reason we didn't end up including it.
Okay.
One of the things we did is we talked to our consulting designers, and one of the concerns that was brought up is mod hunting. And this was brought up in Discord as well. That player that goes out there and looks for every little thing they can get a +1 on in order to raise up their number, right? And going kind of overboard with that.
Right.
So we started saying, well, maybe we need to put a cap. That's exactly what we suggested. But then some of the feedback we got from other folks was that, yeah, but at that point, you start capping the creativity. You start capping the story. You start making people worried about which thing they want to use or what's the one they're most likely to get the GM to agree to. The reality is that it's probably going to depend on the players. In my game, I've never seen that happen very much. Like, we've been playing this for a little longer than everyone else. We haven't seen people sort of going overboard. If they did, what I might say to the person as a GM, and this is one way you can handle it, is say, look, people try to find every little mod, just tell them that at some point there's diminishing returns. It's like, yeah, you know what? That doesn't actually help you, right? You need to just stop, right? And that becomes a person-to-person situation as opposed to something you need to codify in the rules that then makes someone else feel blocked, or that makes you have an unrealistic limit. Like that's one of the challenges of advantage and disadvantage, right? Is that, well, if I have 5 things that are giving me advantage and 1 that's giving me disadvantage, how does that cancel out, right? So yeah, it's a tough question, but I do think that I kind of trust people to use it well. And if they don't, I trust GMs to sort of rein that in, but the playtest will tell us for sure.
Well, Richard Lee Byers says one more elaborate modifier with odds greater than +2 that adds mods greater than +1, excuse me, could be the modular add-ons.
That is an excellent point, because that's one of the things that we want to be able to do is offer people these modules so they can go, look, +1 for everything is a nice, easy, fast way to play, but I like a little more simulation. And maybe here's a mod system for modifiers, a module that lets you have cooler, more gradient modifiers with different levels, and you can bring that into play. Absolutely. That would be a very cool thing to see.
Okay, let's talk about skipping the roll then.
Yeah. So one of the things that we liked about this system was that if you wanted to, you could just compare the action score to the difficulty score and know whether or not the character succeeds. Now, I personally like rolling dice. I would not want to do this most of the time in my own game. Some people might, but more often the way I see it is that whole thing where you tell people, look, you don't have to roll for everything. People say that all the time, but then it's really hard to know. But with this, you sort of put a system in place that lets you still compare without having to roll. So for example, let's say the characters come up to a wall and they're like, well, what's on the other side of this wall? And the GM goes, well, it looks like it's pretty hard to climb. I'm going to say you got to be skilled to climb over this wall. It's a difficulty score of 6. So the player goes, well, let me see what my score is. They add it up and they go, oh, well, look, man, I've got a 7. So GM goes, cool. You climb up and look over the top of the wall. We don't have to roll, right? They got a roughly a 65% chance of success. If they're even, the scores are difficulty to action. They're going to make it eventually anyway. Let's just let them look. Now, what if they're being pursued by a bunch of orcs? At this point, the tensions are high. Adrenaline is running. I'm going to make you roll. Even if you got a 7 and the difficulty is 6, I think you should probably roll because we just don't quite know how things are going to turn out under the circumstances. And so it's just a cool way that you could utilize the system, and it balances nicely in terms of the math, because I've done way, way too much math on this along the way. So, yeah.
Okay, well, let me go to Sable Things. Then I have another point on this.
Sure.
So this would be very easy to mod into a diceless system where you spend resource points to add to your mod stack to overcome the DS.
That would be super cool. Sable Phoenix should definitely remember that, and I hope people build some of these things. I see ideas like that. I'm like, oh, I want to play that when this is done. That'd be cool.
Okay, so my question would be, which is what I was thinking from the game design perspective, is that it seems like often these games are designed with the expectation that you're going to be rolling dice.
Mm-hmm.
But then there is something like your paragraph here that says, oh, by the way, sometimes you might not want to. I have been thinking about flipping that design and saying that ordinarily, because it seems like if you write it like that you write all this, here's all the dice rolls, and here's how you figure all the dice. And then, by the way, here's this paragraph after you've read through all of that says, hey, sometimes you can skip this.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the expectation you're going to be rolling it.
Yeah.
What if you flipped that, which is what I'm thinking about, and saying that ordinarily you're not going to be rolling dice. You're going to be comparing these numbers. You're going to be seeing and if you are higher than this number, then you succeed, and we go on. And then after you explain that system, then you say, but then in certain conditions, such as adventuring conditions, or we say under pressure here, and I don't have my under pressure ready here, but when you're under pressure, then you would roll.
Mm-hmm.
I'm wondering how much that matters, and something tells me that it matters quite a bit. The way that you phrase that in your rules, are you explaining it as, hey, here's how you adjudicate whether or not you succeed or fail, and sometimes you may need to roll a dice for it, or are you saying here's all the dice rolls, and sometimes you may not?
It's interesting.
Do you think that matters?
Lisanto, one of his comments was exactly this. He said the way that I had written up a more minimalist version of this to give to our consulting designers. And he said, you led with the idea that you could just compare, and then you said roll dice. It makes it sound like that's what you want the game to be. And I was like, it's fascinating. Just the order of the information can convey a certain style of play in the mind of the reader. In reality, we do want to focus on, at least for our cool name core rules, we are going to be a dice rolling game, because that's what the majority of players in our backers, in the people we've talked to, are looking for. But you could absolutely write a game like that. In fact, it made me think of something as we're talking about, like you could have a certain number of action points. And if you burn an action point, you just compare and move on. But if you run out of action points, now you have to start rolling, because it's never certain anymore. Now you're pushing yourself beyond your capabilities. You're on the edge now. You maybe make it, you maybe won't each time. So there are ways that you could do that and have a very different style of game. Absolutely.
I love that you use the term "on the edge," because we've used that as well. But I would say so that it depends on, I guess it depends on whether or not you want to emphasize on how many times is a player going to need to, when is a player going to need to roll in the course of what they are trying to do versus how many times they might actually roll in the game.
Yeah.
Because like if I'm talking about crafting something, then here's your crafting score. Here is the difficulty to craft that thing. And you're crafting it in off time. Well, then we just need a comparison. And are you able to do that, or are you not able to do that? Is that beyond your skill, or is that not beyond your skill? There's only a certain number of times when you are under pressure or you're operating at the edge. I've used that exact same phrase. When you're operating at the edge, that you need to figure out whether or not you can bridge basically that small gap between what you can do and what you may be able to do. And that's what the dice are trying to adjudicate. But that it is the game master's job to design most of the game so that you are operating at the edge.
Yeah, that's a really good way to put it.
So, so that when you're not at the edge, we're just comparing scores and you're able to do that. And like, listen, I got a craft skill of this. I'm trying to make a that, and I can do that. And I take 3 units of my whatever I got right here, and I can. And so I'm done. And when you start the game, you're just doing that. And then all of a sudden you're now in adventuring conditions. Now it all of a sudden matters. That gap matters, which is where 70% of your game is going to fall. And then once it's done, you come back out of that.
Yeah. And see, that's the thing that I'm really excited about this system, is that it supports that style of play where you can go back and forth between the way that you're doing it. And for example, your crafting example, that might be to craft the item within the set amount of time. It takes 1 day to craft it. Well, what if I've got 6 hours? It's like, well, man, you're going to have to get some additional levels of success. So I'm going to roll and pray that I open end, right? So I can get that thing done faster than normal. And so now it's the same type of action, but there's a different way to do it. Same with like shopping, right? Like we played a game recently and we kept rolling to find stuff in the stores. And people they roll terrible. And it's like, no, we're out of rope. You know,
was that Warhammer?
No, I'll never confirm nor deny.
Okay. Well, we were looking through the Warhammer Fantasy RPG, and all of their all of their examples where you're trying to find a jacket in the, and you need to roll to see if you can observe a jacket and how far.
Yeah, and so that's the thing, is we kept running out of not finding any of the stuff anyone wanted to buy. And I thought, this would work really well in just a comparative system where you could say, hey, my guy's either good at finding stuff or bad at finding stuff. The merchant can get it or they can't, make it really simple and straightforward.
Let's see. Okay. Why don't you talk about this idea of the shtick or the modus operandi of the player?
Yeah, so one of the things, because we wanted people to focus on the dice mechanics, we wanted to focus them on grabbing dice, adding up scores, difficulty scores, action scores, throwing them. We wanted to keep everything else sort of simple and in the background. And so rather than doing skills and classes and building out a whole system that people had to try to think about, we use something that I called a modus operandi, an MO. And what an MO represents is kind of like an old school D&D, like first edition, basic edition. You didn't have a skill list, you just had a class. And that class represented a package of skills and talents, experience, tricks and tips of the trade, right? And that's what a MO is. So you might be a warrior or you might be a cleric, and that's going to represent all sorts of things. It could represent your training when you were younger, your knowledge, your physical training. It could represent all of those things in one simple package. And as long as you can come up with a good story and the GM's cool with it, it lets you add your MO score, which is usually a number in the play test of 1 to 3, to your attribute to determine your action score. So it takes the place of skills, talents, feats, spells, everything. It's an all-in-one tool.
Okay. I'm sympathetic to this. Okay, but here's the problem. And you talked about this on your design blog. So I'm sympathetic to this, but here's the problem that I'm trying to get around.
Mm-hmm.
You gave the example of superheroes coming up to a cliff, and it's time to climb the cliff. And a traditional RPG way to do that would say everybody make a climb check. And some people are good at climbing, and some people are not. But that if you're looking at a particular type of style of game, when these superheroes come up, they're all going to get over the cliff using their particular way of getting over the cliff.
That's right.
Okay, somebody's gonna climb, yes, because they're good at climbing. Somebody's gonna levitate. Somebody's gonna use the rocket pack that they've got on them and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so then how do you avoid everybody always using their best modifier during all attempts?
So here's the thing: is that for this playtest, to be fair, I don't really care for this playtest. Right? This is not where the game is probably going to land in terms of the core rules. This is simply a placeholder to allow us to have skills and attributes that come into play. Now, I will say that when we've played it, people do try to come up with stuff, but sometimes you're like going, no, sorry, that doesn't really count. Or I put in a rule that says, if you think that the person might have some skill in this, but they don't really know it that well, you could add 1 to the difficulty score to say you just have sort of rough familiarity. So yes, you will have people who always try to come up with really creative ways to make their ability work. But I think what I saw is that if people are playing not competitively, but rather in a storytelling point of view, they generally are okay with saying like, yeah, I'm a wizard. I'm probably not going to know how to build a rampart, right? I'm not going to know how to dig a trench or pick a lock. It's not my thing. Now you might say, I'm going to try to use a spell. And that then comes into play where you have to adjudicate some things. But again, the important part is that you're adding up scores and rolling dice for this playtest. So yeah, there's a lot you'd have to do if you wanted to turn that into a playable mechanic.
I think so, because sometimes it seems like it often makes this obstacles into non-obstacles.
I mean, it can, right? But again, like I said, that's one of the challenges you'd have to come up with if you wanted to create, like we've talked about, whether someone might want to create a module that works that way, where you eliminate the skill system, because we expect that we're going to have a rather traditional skill system. But if you wanted a module where you play in that style, yeah, you'd have to put some thought into how do you put guardrails around this so that each person is special and important, right? So that each person has a chance to be unique in their own way, because that's the biggest danger, in my opinion. Not so much that they can overcome all the obstacles, because if someone comes up with a really cool story for how their character overcomes the obstacle, why stop them? You should want them to do that, right? I mean, that's awesome. It makes for a good story. But you do still want guardrails to allow the wizard to be special and the fighter to be special in their own way, right? But yeah, I figure if people come up with a way to overcome an obstacle that's really creative and uses their abilities in a cool way, that just enhances everyone's experience.
Well, and so much of that seems to be world dependent too, especially when it comes to like magic.
Yeah.
If you're like, okay, I'm the wizard and I approach the cliff. Well, what do? I levitate over it. No problem. I'll use my wizard skill. Well, is that even a skill? It's a spell that's available in that particular world. Is that something that the wizard can even do? That's one of the things that makes magic so hard, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's why for us, when we were playing, I basically let the mage do what they wanted. And the more powerful the spell, I assumed the more skilled you'd have to be to pull it off. So it just got a higher and higher difficulty number depending on what they wanted to do. Because again, we just wanted to get through the story and roll the dice and see how that worked. And it worked pretty well, really. We had a wizard using Mage Hand. We had a wizard using a sleep spell. said, I want to put all the goblins to sleep. I'm like, well, that sounds pretty tough. I'm going to say you got to be an expert to pull that off. And so we look at the chart, see what the expert difficulty score is, and they tried it, and it failed. And they're like, oh, well, that was worth a try.
Well, okay, so that's important. So it seems like this system is encouraging you to try things and see if you get the dice results.
Especially right now, because we wanted to encourage people to try stuff, which will get them rolling the dice, which will let us know whether this mechanic works. And that's the key thing we need to walk away with, is knowing whether or not the mechanic we've come up with works. Because if it does, that's going to be the foundation for pretty much everything else we do going forward. And so that, you're absolutely right, Heath. That's exactly was the point of that, to get people trying stuff and rolling dice.
Okay. Well, so I mean, like, here is the example that we always use, and we used this morning. And I think it goes a lot toward your idea about game design, depending on what you want, the way you answer this question.
Yeah.
If the low-level thief, the Hobbit thief, is approaching Smaug the Red Dragon, and they're like, I want to shoot my short bow at it. I want to try to kill it. What is the game master's answer? And it seems like your answer is, okay, roll and see if it happens.
Yeah, I'd say, well, I mean, you're attacking a dragon. He's probably got 10 armor. It's not hard to hit him. He's like right there. If you're trying to hit a certain location, that'll up your difficulty score by quite a bit. Roll the dice and see what happens. Now, most of the time they're going to
try
roll,
to shoot him through the eye,
and it's going to bounce off the armor, and you'd be like, well, that was a terrible plan. Hopefully you didn't wake him up with it. But every so often, and we saw this happen in an Earth Dawn game, which used a very similar system, the player open ends and open ends and open ends, and suddenly this moment becomes an epic story that literally we've told the story of them killing the bad guy in a single blow over and over the past 25 years, retold that story, and it was an epic moment. So yeah, let them try. It might turn into an epic moment that no one at the table will ever forget.
So that, okay, well, that's an important game design philosophy. So yeah, all right, roll. And that's why the open-ended is there. We might not have mentioned that before, but this is all open. I think, well, maybe we did, but it's all open-ended high. So that's what I'm saying. Go ahead. Okay, here's the target difficulty.
Yeah.
Roll, and if you roll high enough, the dragon can be out of here.
Yeah, and it probably won't happen, but if it does, what a moment. What a moment. That thief is going to be dancing around the table cheering at that moment.
Because they rolled well.
They rolled well, but what it represents is that moment that fate intervened, right? It maybe the gods did it. Maybe it was just what that character was destined to do their entire life, was defeat that dragon, right? I really do believe in turning what you might say, oh, you just wrecked the whole adventure by figuring it out. But from my perspective, you're never wrecking adventure. You're just telling a story we never thought to tell on our own. And that's exactly what happens there. And it's up to the players to embrace that, and the GM to embrace that and to run with it and turn it into something cool. Because look, it's not going to happen most of the time, right? It's generally not going to happen. So it's a worry that no one should have. Okay.
Well, now, speaking of worries no one should have,
you
are not open-ended low.
No, I'm not open-ending low. For a couple of reasons. One, I don't really see a value in, I take it back. I see lots of ways that you could make that valuable. I wanted to focus more on dramatic success than on dramatic failure. And so that's the reason for that. The second reason is that I think that when you start open-ending in both directions, it gets quite complicated. And we wanted something that was very simple. Now, you could certainly have a module, because there'd be value in that. Like, you could get a lot of no ands, no buts situations if you did that.
The Sable Phoenix says that's the genius way of describing RPGs, telling a story nobody thought to tell on their own. And Schmitty says, I really love Mark's philosophy on this.
Hey, thanks.
So yeah, so this is really interesting. Like, it's made me think of some new things in some new ways, because it seems like in many systems that I read, when you have an open-ended high situation, they are often paired with an open-ended low situation. And some players love that. I mean, that's a particular style of play.
Oh,
some
yeah,
people just love it. So it's not invalid or anything like that.
Yeah, right.
But okay. But you're setting up a situation where you can be theoretically infinitely heroic, but you never have to take the risk of being infinitely stupid.
Yeah, right. And I mean, let's not be, look, if players do that themselves, at least at my table, they find infinitely stupid ways to do things all on their own without rolling the dice. But the thing is that I've never seen someone, not never, I've rarely seen someone get a double open-ended low and feel really excited about the story they were telling.
Nothing exciting happens after that, right?
Yeah, it's
Like,
and I mean, you creatively you come up with it. Oh,
well,
Richard's
like
asking.
Richard,
about
like
that,
how's open? Well, like in MERP or something like that, it's a D100 system. So if you roll, it might be a 1, 2, or 3, but it might be a 1, 2. I forget. But if you roll a 1 or 2, you're open-ended low, and you got to roll again and subtract that number from that die. So if you roll a 2, and then you roll a 100, you are now at negative 98. And because you rolled a 100, you got to roll again and subtract again. Then you roll a 50, and now you're at like negative 148 on your roll. So how you would do open-ended low in like Cool Name over here is like if you got 2d6, you're rolling 2d6, and you roll 2 1s, then you would roll those again. And if you roll, so that would give you a 2. But if you roll a 12, then you'd be negative 10. You roll 2d, and you would have rolled a negative 10 during that.
And so, yeah, that's a completely legitimate style of play, and it could totally work. And I think that it would make a great module again. This is what I love about this, is that I really hope that people, someday we see people on Drive-Thru-RPG just publishing a module for open-ended low and Cool Name. Awesome. I can plug it in and play it, because some people would have a blast with seeing what that sort of epic disaster looks like.
Yeah, but I think, it is making me think a lot more, because like I said, I've got a friend, and I've told the story before, but I got a friend who says the thing that he loves about Rollmaster is that it doesn't matter if you're King Arthur drawing Excalibur about to kill the peasant warrior. You can roll open-ended low and stab yourself through the throat, and that's the end of that. And he loves that.
Oh, yeah. I tripped on running down the beach in Rollmaster, tripped over a log, and ended up breaking my neck and dying. So I have been there. I've lived it, right?
So this idea of just preserving the open-ended high is really, really interesting, especially as it relates to the I know it's quick and dirty combat.
Yeah.
But I was having an epiphany during the morning grind today about the implication of that with the system that you described in quick and dirty combat.
Yeah. You're talking about the player side, always player facing role.
Because right now you have it written that it's all player facing. I don't know if it's all player racing roles, but the combat had player facing roles, so that there is the player rolls to defend, the bad guy does not roll to attack.
Yeah, it's so right now I wrote both options because that's a real sort of sticking point for people on which one they like, right? That's one of the real split points where there is a camp of people who think players should roll for everything and the GM shouldn't be rolling. And then there is a group that thinks that takes the fun out of it for the GM, and it takes a lot of the sort of random storytelling. But the way it's set up is that you can then, when the monster attacks your character, instead of the GM rolling for the monster, you make a dodge roll against the monster's skill to see whether you get out of the way or not. And, I think what you're getting to is this idea about what the open-ended roll means in that situation.
Well, yes. Okay. So on that, first of all, on the player rolling thing, I'm not sure where I fall on that as well. On the more RPG side of that, because you even mentioned, does it feel like the orc is there if the orc is not attacking, is rolling to hit you? And I think that's a concern. That's a concern because I think when I'm writing rules, I tend to think in terms of symmetry. So if you got to roll to attack the orc has got to roll to attack you.
Yeah.
And then also you cannot discount the game master having fun. If the game master likes to roll out, you can't discount that from your game design philosophy.
Yeah.
It seems to me like in a game which is all cooperative, or like a game that's like Gloomhaven, where everybody's playing the game or playing the game together, that seems to be the perfect environment for all player rolls. You roll to dodge. Because I like when I'm playing Hero Quest, I've been playing Hero Quest solo play here on Dinner and a Board Game. And I do hate having to roll for the enemy's like defense and stuff like that, because I don't want to roll for them. So if it's just me, I would prefer to have all player facing roles.
Yeah.
So yeah, I know that on the face of it's got to be a sticking point. Oh yeah, yeah. I saw. I did an unboxing of that.
I love
the other day.
I'm playing through it right now. I'm up to the 6th adventure in the core set. But anyway.
Oh yeah, have you played it before, or is this your first time through?
I've had the original for years, but this is my first time playing through the new version and going through it.
Okay.
And I got obliterated in Adventure 6. But anyway.
Okay, let's see. Okay, wait. We're going to return. We're still on that point, but let me go to a couple of comments. Richard says, "What would be the meaning of a negative dice total?" Well, for instance, in this quick and dirty combat, you're comparing the difference between two rolls for damage.
Yeah.
So if you all of a sudden roll extreme negative, you're rolling extreme damage. Rollmaster has provided many hilarious memory, and that's fine for certain styles of play, right? Yeah, that can be a hilarious memory.
Is that it's interesting too, because one of the things that came up is this idea of having degrees of success and degrees of failure, and the degrees of failure don't really come into play in in the way that the game is written today. You have fail or success. And that's what a negative open end does for you, is it gives you these degrees of failure where you can have sort of this, do I just sort of miss it, or does it an epic, crash and burn?
The Open D&D says, this is a good question. Are player facing rolls also open table with no screens, or like the player rolls their own damage? So are you planning on having this with a screen?
The way that it's set up right now is it's all open. The player is rolling, and the amount that for the quick and dirty combat, which again, it's not meant to be the combat system. It's just there so we can play through this. But the difference between your roll and your target number that you fail by is how much damage you take. So if the target number is 6 and you fail, you take that much damage by how much you missed by. So yeah, the player is effectively rolling their own damage in this situation.
But as a consequence of rolling their own defense, they're not exactly they're rolling their own defense, and that tells you their damage.
Yep, exactly.
So here's DVJ. Welcome.
Hey, DVJ.
DVJ says, with player-facing rolls, open-ended negative numbers harm the PC, such as suffering massive damage from trying to dodge or avoid an attack.
Yeah, nailed it.
Yes. Okay, so that's why... Oh, Guy in the Sky got his Hero Quest today.
Hey, all right.
PH says, never trim your nails in Rollmaster. You might end up hitting a major artery.
He's not wrong. There's probably a table for it.
There's probably a table for it. Right. Okay. So this leads. Okay. So then where we're going with that is what DBJ was just talking about, because it seems like in some, well, no, it doesn't seem like it is the case in some of the rules that we've been reading, like in Knave, he says that whether or not here's how you do GM roles and here's how you do player facing roles, and the math is going to be the same either way you do it. Except for that's not the case here as you have it set up in Cool Name, because you are only open-ended positive. And that was the epiphany that I came to this morning during the morning grind. So it actually does matter who's rolling and how this is going to go if you've got open-ended positive.
Yeah, it does. Because if the GM's rolling, you then have the possibility of the monster open-ending, right? And making just a really incredible attack, which is the way it worked in Earth Dawn, and it worked really well. I mean, don't get me wrong, it can be fun both ways. And the math of the game works well no matter which direction you go with it. So at the end of the day, it works whether you want to have player-facing roles or GM-facing roles, the math still works, and you can do both, right?
Well, it depends on, so here's the question that you have to answer as far as your game design.
Yeah.
If you're going to step up, I say, all right, I can step up into the doorway to defend it against this orc.
Yep.
Can this orc kill me? Okay. If the game master is rolling and it's open-ended positive, the answer is always yes.
Yes.
I mean, with decreasing levels of probability, but the answer is always yes. If I step up into this door, the orc can kill me. Yep. If you reverse that and you make it player facing high, then there is a known maximum that orc can hit you. That makes it more gamist.
Yeah, it does. It does. It changes the style of play. And see, this is where we get into the whole challenge of what style of play people enjoy. And this is the biggest trick we're going to have with the core rules, is which one of these are we delivering to people as the way to play the core rules in its base form. And I don't know the answer to that yet. We are going to have to, it's going to have to see a lot of table play to really understand what's going to work best.
I haven't seen I mean, I've done like 255 episodes of the Morning Grind, and that doesn't mean we've done 255 different RPGs, but maybe 200 that we've read through. And I haven't ever seen that issue been brought up. Like this is the first time that I've seen that encountered. I mean, because I guess this game could be played either way, and that's the modules.
Yeah.
But if you're more gamist than like if you're playing Hero Quest and you're going to block the door for the orc only swings 3D attack die. So if you've got 5 hit points, you know you're not going to die that round. Okay, you might lose 3 because Hero Quest can be rather swingy, and that's a big part of Hero Quest that you might lose 3, which is a chunk. Okay, but you know you're going to die.
So now there's a few ways you could do it though, right? First, there's the idea of having a weapon. So the weapon's going to increase the potential damage. There's also the possibility of a critical failure. You could allow for critical failure rolls, which we haven't even touched on in Cool Name yet. So if I roll 1s on all my dice, perhaps that's a critical failure. Perhaps then the damage is doubled. And now maybe that orc can kill me if something goes horribly wrong, right? If I'm rolling a D6 alone now, that's starting to be a dangerous moment for me, right? And so those are the sorts of things that we can look at. If we end up going with that all player facing approach, I think there are some things we can put in that will change the nature of that a little bit so that you have slightly more. Another sort of a way that you could look at it is maybe only boss monsters and lieutenants get rolls.
Yeah,
right?
Well, you could do that too. Yeah, you're right.
That makes a great way for those minions who run up there. You don't have to roll for every single one of them, right? You're not sitting there as a GM rolling for 25 goblins. You have the player dodging out of the way, right?
Well,
what's your dodge for this
great
round?
point too.
So there are things that we'll be able to do if we decide to go that route, and I think there's some very cool stuff we'll be able to experiment with.
I mean that is fantastic that you could have like a minion rule.
Yeah.
And say that, okay, you always roll to defend against most standard bad guys.
Yeah.
But if it's a lieutenant or it's a captain, well, then they're going to be rolling against you. And that means that, yes, they could theoretically drop you in one hit. That's really interesting. That's really interesting.
And you could even at that point do opposed rolls, right? That could be fun too. So there's lots of possibilities, right?
It can be fun because you could also, because you've got the scale for the difficulty score.
Yeah.
You can turn that into dice too.
Yep.
Now we talk about that a lot too. That do you want active defense? And a lot of people around here on this channel tend to just intuitively say yes, that I like active defense. Okay, then you get into why, and maybe the maybe the player facing role substitutes for that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's that's the thing about it is that the thing that's fun is that you could even, and this is one of my sort of dream scenarios, the math allows you could even just say, well, I'm going to do active defense, and the other person's like going, no, forget it, I'm just going to do normal defense, right? Flat defense. I mean, there's options there, and mathematically in the end it comes out to pretty much the same thing, right?
Sable says this is very intriguing. I'm actually getting excited over this as much as the DM's new system. Which, by the way, I haven't checked out. I need to, but I don't know it. So
Sable just made my day.
Mad says yes. Minions are a known threat. Speed bumps. I'm kind of liking that potentially. That if it's minion level, then you would be able to potentially calculate, because I personally, the way I'm going, I don't mind a more gamist kind of thing. So if you calculate out that, okay, I can make this move because I won't die. So I'm going to stand here this round for you to try to get this off. That's not bothering me. It will other people, because that is a bit meta, but it's more gamist. So personally, that's not bothering me. But that means that the minions might be known and calculable, but then once you get to the lieutenant and the captain, they're not. Yeah. That could be a really good halfway point. That's the halfway point that could be really good. Yeah. Because it's true that I personally do often like active defense as well, but it's very difficult, I've found, when you're doing the game design to justify it, because you're doubling the number of dice rolls. And especially if both, if you've got a 4 and I got a +3.
Mm-hmm.
Does it make sense for us both to roll a d20 and add that to our roll? Well, it might in any one attack. I mean, because it could be swinging all over the place. But on the whole, you're like, wait a minute, you're adding the same random number to both sides.
Yeah.
And all you're doing is increasing swinginess and whatever. So it often becomes difficult for me to justify from a game design perspective.
Yeah. Yeah.
We get lots of comments coming in. PH says, I like active defense when the GM does flat attack. Oh, so if there's a flat, so if the GM attacks with a flat number, then the other person should roll. Richard says minions could be defined on the same basis as deciding whether or not the players needs to roll to achieve a non-combat task. Wait a minute, let me see.
Yeah.
Minions could be defined on the same basis as deciding whether or not the player needs to roll to achieve a non-combat task. Oh, well, yeah, okay. Yeah, I think I know where you're going with that. Yeah, it could be. So Matt Colville has put out designing the game videos, and they're very exciting. Okay, I haven't seen any of those yet. Okay, so there's not a PDF yet to read. Okay, I need to watch those videos then.
I'll have to check it out. Cool.
Let's see. Doesn't the steel wall AC character act like the party's choke point shield anyway? Zero the Blade says.
Yeah, I think you're saying that if they're not rolling and the one person can just stop everybody, that's kind of the point anyway of the character, I think.
Matt said something like something about attack with roll, or was it just me getting it wrong? I'm not sure what that means. Sable says active defense versus flat attack is just, it is basically another way of saying player facing rolls. Right?
So now I will say one thing that came up was, talking to Steve Long, the thing he doesn't like about a player facing defense roll is that it feels like the monster has already hit you. You're guilty until proven innocent. And to him, that's not as much fun, which is a great point, right? The sense that if I don't dodge, I am hit automatically. There's no way for the monster just to miss on its own accord, which I think is an interesting problem.
Yeah, that's... Have you played Gloomhaven? I've only played a little bit. I want to play more.
Yeah.
You play. So that one does have the bad guys do... It's cards, but they roll to hit through cards, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. But I am really liking the idea of if you're trying to bias the game toward being heroic, then having the player facing with open-ended high seems to do that.
Yeah.
You never have to bias it toward player inadvertent stupidity because of low rolls. And if you're not doing some type of division between minions and elite monsters or something like that, then you give the players some type of agency and control because they know what could potentially happen to them. And I'm not personally, I'm not opposed to that line of gaming because like when we're playing Hero Quest, okay, the barbarian's got 8 hit points and the orc's got 1. So there's a bit of a bias in knowing what's going to happen when the barbarian attacks goes up against the orc.
Yeah. Yep.
So this is very interesting. This is very interesting.
Yeah, and these are exactly the sort of challenges we're running into as we go through this is how do we make these choices? How do we find the right sort of sweet spot for the core system as we're working through this? But I think the first thing is we just need to make sure that this mechanic works. And so far, it's been pretty positive.
Yeah, and see, my answer had been like to the halfling thief versus the dragon. It should be no, because I was saying that you need to stack up more bonuses.
Yeah,
that in order, if it's for the player, if the player is going to win due to their choices, the answer needs to be no. They can't until they stack up enough bonuses in order to kill the dragon. Then the player wins by their choices and not by the roll of the dice.
Yeah.
But if you're making an argument that the roll of the dice can be fun, which is true.
But you got to keep in mind, though, that, killing that dragon with the arrow, even with an open-ended system, we're like talking about a scratch-off ticket at this point. You're winning the lottery. And the odds of that happening are exceptionally slim. And so that's kind of one of the reasons why I feel like it's a problem that doesn't need to be solved, because it's just not going to happen in 9,999 times out of 10,000, right?
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. That the way to allow that, and I think this is correct, that the way to allow that is I don't want to say only, but potentially only through an open-ended system. Because if it can be done, if it's a D20 system and it can be done on the roll of a D20,
Yeah.
that's what players can I roll it on this D20? Because it's a 20 is a 5% chance. That's pretty huge.
Yeah.
So that's why if you're doing a system like that where it's just flat, my inclination is to go no.
Mm-hmm.
You can't roll for that. That's what's my problem with that, with like the D20 system with modifiers of +2 and +3 and all of that for that reason. But if it could only be done through extreme luck,
Yeah,
and they want to roll for it, well then fine. So I'm going to think a lot more about that. About that. All right. Well, we have been going for just over an hour here. Is there is there other points that you want to bring up or things you want to talk about?
Well, I mean, in terms of game design, one of the things that I thought was the most interesting was something that came up this morning where we were talking about the style of play and what we were angling towards.
Oh,
and
yes.
I just wanted to bring this up for folks because I think that it's like super valuable in terms of one of the things that we worked our way through.
Is that here in this document, or did you
just
write that out? You may have just wrote that out this morning. So, okay.
You know what I'm going to do is I'm just going to paste it into the comments really quick here.
Okay. I'll bring it up. Okay.
Yep. So, yeah. So one of the things that we wanted to do right off the bat was define what the style of play was. And this was advice given to us by our consulting designers. Ken Hite gave us a lot of good advice. Robin Laws gave some good advice on this. And we ended up saying, like, what is this game like? What's it like when you sit down to play this game? And then we got a lot of feedback from our backers, and we got additional feedback from our designers. And this is what we ended up coming up with, which is down-to-earth heroes with a handful of exceptional abilities travel to wondrous places for action-packed adventures where they risk life and limb, negotiating obstacles, and overcoming challenges and vanquishing deadly foes to accomplish extraordinary goals. And what's interesting is that every part of this actually tells us something about the game. So Down-to-Earth Heroes tells us that we're talking about heroes on the scale of Indiana Jones, James Bond, Aragorn, Black Widow. We're not talking the Supermen of the world, right? For our core game experience. We talk about a handful of exceptional abilities, which is where we're saying they don't have 1,000 powers, but they might have one or two things that sets them apart from the norm, right? So right away, you're getting a sense for where the level of play is in the game, right? And as you go through each one of these things, we have a different description of what it means and why it's there. And at the end of the day, what you end up with is a very specific style of play. It informs the game design. It informs what our scale of abilities are. And it was a great exercise that took way longer than I thought it was, but I was really glad when we did that at the end. It really paid off. And so I want to just encourage folks who are building their own stuff to consider this because it really was worth it.
So travel to wondrous places, action-packed adventures where they risk life and limb. So this is not, that shouldn't be a cakewalk for them. That's right. One of the things that folks talked about was the idea of having lingering wounds or injuries or things like that, right? If you think about John McClane in Die Hard going around having stepped on all the glass, right? And yet that becomes part of the story, becomes part of the adventure. We don't want death by 1,000 cuts. That's one thing that was clear, right? Where it's like you're so wounded that you're just stumbling around praying you can get to the next thing. But having some of that come into play does add to the story. And so people wanted that in place. Overcoming challenges and vanquishing deadly foes to accomplish extraordinary goals. Yeah. And, the extraordinary goals is simply saying that you aren't just going through this trying to, get into the castle and unlock the door because someone locked their keys in, right? You're doing something extraordinary. You're doing something fantastic. Again, we're talking almost pulp, almost sword and sorcery style of approach to things. So. All right. So if people want to get in on this and they were not in on the Kickstarter, because I got these playtest rules for being a backer, but if people want this playtest rules, they can go to coolnamerpg.com. Well, if you go to coolnamerpg.com right now, you can pledge, which means you'll get all of the additional playtest stuff we put out early. And that'll also get you a chance to get the books before anyone else. But we are going to release the playtest document to a wider audience on that website later
probably early next week, I'm thinking, because we want to give the backers a first shot at this, but we don't mind other people getting a chance to take a look at it. We'll also be sharing that on the Discord. So if people check out our Discord server, we'll be sharing it there as well.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Mark. This was a fantastic conversation, I thought. I have really enjoyed it.
That was great. I have a bunch of ideas now, too, that I've got to write down really quick once we're finished here. So this is excellent.
Well, I
so
do, too, for the stuff
having
I
me.
was working on. And I hope to be able to develop for this. We've been working on worlds here on this channel as well. And so I would like to be able to take some of the worlds, and I've been trying to put them on different systems. I think it'd be neat to put them in Cool Name system as well.
That'd be awesome. We'd love it.
All right. Everybody, check out coolname.com, coolnamerpg.com. Check that out. And late pledge. Be a part of it. All right, everybody. Later.
Take care.